कसं काय पुढे? Ram Ram. Good morning, everyone. Welcome, people. Welcome to yet another edition of Deccan Ruby Conf. And we are very, very proud to announce that this year is getting bigger and better. We do expect you all to tweet a lot about the conference. Use the hashtags that are there. I think DRC19 is shorter. We are all shortcut people. Make use of that one a lot. But this time, we have some interesting statistics about the participation. Now look around you. Do you see empty seats? Right? You see a few empty seats there, right? How many of you all actually made it here on time, in time for registration? And now the next question, don't raise your hands. How many of you all thought, Are Puneri standard time? Okay, the laugh said it all. But this time, we have a lot more attendees. Last year, we had actually tried and capped it at 200. This year, we said, let's just keep it open and see how far it goes. So we are very happy to see almost 60 more attendees registering in record time with 70 companies and 5 sponsors. बहुत नाइंसाफी है. So I can see people wearing t-shirts. Which company is yours? Clock. All right. Which other companies are here who have more than 4 people who have not sponsored? Jombe. Well done. Welcome here. Who else is here? Don't worry. I won't bite often. Drip Capital. Nice. How many of you all are there? Ooh, smooth. Who else? Oh, BNY Mellon is here. I've never heard of them. Has anyone heard of BNY Mellon? I thought they don't sponsor anything anywhere. Well done. All right. So we also have a great amount of ladies here. All the ladies in the audience, shout out loudly, Deccan RubyConf. Take one. Let me do that again. Recording, let's record that again. Take two. All the ladies in the house, shout out loudly, Deccan RubyConf. Thank you very much. We love the participation from all of you all here. All right, back to basics. My name is Gautam Rege, and I've been part of the organizing team for Deccan RubyConf since it started. However, usually I don't end up organizing anything. It's Prathamesh, Anuja, Shweta, Satish, Preetham, they take care of a lot of stuff, and then they push me on stage to put out statistics on the slides, which I have no idea about. So there is apparently a lunch coupon somewhere. Did you find it? Yaar, khana pina hai. Khana bhi hai, pina bhi hai. Okay? So you have the beer and soft drinks coupon also in that same lanyard. Without it, you will not be served. I am the bouncer at the party. So if you all need any free drinks, come to me. The schedule is printed on the other side of the lanyard. As you know, we are all Puneri. The schedule will be followed. The time may not. And we definitely want all of you all to attend the conference and listen to the speakers because we have a very interesting lineup. So we've essentially ensured there is no Wi-Fi. Not that I can prevent everyone from still looking at their phones. But please do look at your phones to tweet as much as you can. We also expect a lot of interaction from you all. So we're going to have a panel discussion in the afternoon. The topic, however, will not be announced now because we want a lot of straight from the heart questions coming up during the panel. So we'll announce it shortly before the panel. It is not a technical panel. It's going to be more non-technical discussions. And it's going to hit close to home. Every one of you all is probably going to feel with it. We'd really want some participation from you all. And of course, nothing's going to happen here without the sponsors. What do you think we should do this time? How do we, thank all the sponsors here? Should we shout? Should we dance? Should we clap? What do you all want me to make you all do? It's still early in the morning. People are still waking up. Dance, right? Yeah, it should be fun. But please, did you all know that by clapping, you actually wake up? It's also allowed that when somebody speaks really loudly, you also get up. But let's just clap for now. So keep the claps going on for our platinum sponsor, Gojek. Our gold sponsors, Josh Software and Trusting Social. Keep clapping, people. Our digital sponsors, Big Binary, and silver sponsor, Salone. Oh, wow, that works. All right, cool. Thank you so much. And we're going to have flash talks. How many of you all are, I'm going to take a flash poll. How many of you all are interested in giving a flash talk today? Nice. Raise your hand high. You're supposed to be proud of it. Okay. We're going to have, I know, there will be a lot of you all who are not sure, want to get inspired. We'll have a whiteboard put up. Where are we going to put it up? Here? Yeah, we're going to put up a whiteboard here later on. It is a first come, first serve basis. So we are going to try and give everybody a chance here. Now, if you definitely want a chance, remember we are time pressed for time always. So if your name comes like the 11th and the 12th, chances are you're going to have an apology from me saying, hey man, I'll treat you to a beer or a coffee, in the party. But try and get your names there fast. This is the time where we record the flash talks. For all the people who are interested in speaking at different conferences, it is the best opportunity you will get to stand on stage and have the whole audience look at you and listen to you. So make the most of it. The flash talks are going to be about 5 minutes. And in case we get a larger number, we'll reduce it to 3 minutes. And we are very strict on time. I was telling Nadia earlier that, I'm known for kicking people off stage. So time is, oh, he knows. Time is important. We do have a code of conduct. We are very, very particular about the code of conduct, and especially for everyone being comfortable about everything here. So in case anyone finds anything out of the ordinary or which you feel bad about, please come and talk to the organizers. The short version of the code of conduct, Min-Swan. Who knows what Min-Swan is? Nobody knows what Min-Swan is? Oh, people do know. People are just shy. Maths is nice, so we are nice. What is Min-Swan? That's our code of conduct for the conference. So, without further ado, let's begin the conference, and we'll give Nadia 2 rounds of applause. One by the time I introduce you, and one second time when she walks on stage. Okay, I'm joking. but okay, let me introduce Nadia, our first keynote speaker today. She comes from all the way from London, a very, very long flight. And of course, all those who've traveled to the US here, it's a short flight, right? London's really far away. So she's from Makers Academy, one of the bootcamp startups which help you get a lot of learning in Ruby, which helps you learn. Hang on. Get the laptop set up, please. It's a do-it-yourself here. Don't worry about it. Oh, that means now I have to keep you all entertained till she gets wired up, till the mic set up. Welcome to conference organizing. All right. यार सुनना नहीं क्या बोला यार? How's the Josh? Well done. And for all those who've not seen, for you, Laura, this is a movie here where it says, "How's the Josh?" Welcome, Jane. She's got a Jane of all trades T-shirt, which is so cool. But all right, so getting back to Nadia, let's not change our focus here, people. So don't say, "How's the Josh?" I get distracted, man. So I asked her, you know what? She's been here first time to India, and I asked her, "What is it that you liked in your last couple of days stay here?" She said, "Any takers?" What did she say? Okay. Food. Food is a very common answer I get. Think of something different. The rain. Not bad, not bad. It's getting better. But she liked something here a lot. The traffic. And I was like, really? That's so cool. Because she said, you know what? I have been to Nigeria, and they said that if you can drive on Nigerian roads, you can drive anywhere in the world. I said, nah. Amchi Pune. If you can drive here, you can drive anywhere. How many of you all knew that Pune has the largest number of two-wheelers in the world? And how many of you all also know that traffic rules here are super strict? Well, let's put it there. They're supposed to be strict, but of course, they're guidelines, right? So we ask people to be nice. See how relevant Ruby is in our life? You know, we always yield or honk or flick the lights, telling them, yeah, it's me coming first here. So she loves the rain. She loves Shaniwar Wada and Aga Khan Palace. How many of you have actually been there who are from Pune? You see what I'm saying, Nadia? A lot of people here haven't even been to Shaniwar Wada here. But let's say, how many of you all have been to Balewadi High Street or Koregaon Park? And you're always there. Well done, people. So Nadia has her own startup in London called Storygraph. And it's a startup for which you can find books by your mood. So she gave really good examples. I mean, I really like the examples. I'm on a train journey. I want a light reading 300-pager. I said, can you find a mood for, I have my appraisal coming up in 15 minutes. What can I read? She said the relaxing option. How many of you all find your appraisals relaxing? Or, when can I murder my boss? But she's been coding in Ruby for the last 6 years. She has her own an open source speakerline.io for all, and she's open for contributions, right? So all those who are looking to contribute to open source, it's a fantastic place to actually get going. Speakerline.io is very similar to the tool we use, Papercall. But please help her out. It's a very good tool. And I asked her, what is, to set the tone for your talk, set the mood for your talk. I'll give the disclaimer, Nadia. A lot of us have been there, done that. She said, I wrote a script when I started for a customer in a retail e-commerce store. I wrote a script which deleted some categories from the Christmas shopping cart. And I was like, cool. Have you deleted a production database? Oh, we deleted a production database once.
Not the whole thing.
And we were like, oops. So are we set up here?
Yeah.
All right. So let's get on with our talk. Nadia, welcome with a loud round of applause for her, please.
Okay, hi everyone. Everyone can hear me, right? Good. So today I'm going to tell you a mystery story, and you've got to see if you can crack it before I did. And if you do, you come and tell me afterwards what point you realized. Maybe you'll know straight away. But before I tell you this story, I've got a question for you. Do you have a side gig, a side hustle? Something to bring in a little extra each month? I do. Now, at the time of this story that I'm going to tell you today, I was a product manager for a software team in a bank. But by night, I was a private investigator. And what is it that I was investigating? Ruby crimes. Not jewel theft, no, the programming language. And why did I decide to go into private investigating? Well, there were rumors of a shady mastermind causing havoc and confusion amongst Ruby developers worldwide with his constant meddling in the source code. And I wanted to put a stop to it. But I couldn't do this job under my normal name. I had to protect my identity. And so I chose the name Deirdre Bug, D for short. And why? Well, only for the sole purpose of making this joke. And today I want to tell you about one of my more memorable cases, the case of the missing method. Chapter 1. So I'm sitting alone, bored in my office, well, it was really my flat, when the doorbell rings, and it's Mike. And Mike doesn't look too happy. Let me tell you a bit more about Mike. He was an acquaintance of mine. We had some mutual friends, saw each other out and about now and again. He's 24 years old, a junior Ruby developer, and he got excited about test-driven development. And he was applying for an apprenticeship at the prestigious Ruby Institute of Professionals. And he'd managed to get through all of the stages, beating hundreds of applicants to the final stage. It was happening in 2 days. And there were 2 people left fighting for the last spot, himself and a woman named Jenny. So Jenny was 27 years old, also a junior Ruby developer, and she loved Rails. She's also Mike's best friend and housemate. And they quit their consulting jobs at the same time to enter the world of tech, and not long after, they decided to live together. So for the interview, they had agreed to work together to prepare so that each had the best shot. May the best person win, they said. Now, they'd been asked to research a series of topics that they were going to be grilled on. One of them was method lookup, and Jenny had been assigned this topic. And this was why Mike had come to me. Something doesn't add up in Jenny's notes, he said. But Jenny's been so stressed and panicked, rather uncharacteristically, by the interview that she won't hear me out. She's convinced that she's right, and she says they don't have time for Mike's doubts. Mike tells me that if I can help him find the answer to this mystery, he'll have what he needs to confidently correct Jenny's notes and save them from interview failure. So he goes into his satchel and he draws out some papers. They're Jenny's supposedly flawed notes. So I ask him to walk me through them. So Jenny had these boxes which represented a Ruby object. All of the objects had a label that said class. So this was a reference to the parent class of the object in question. Some objects are instance objects, and the class label for them refers to another Ruby object of type class. An object of type class has its own class label, and all objects of type class also had a methods label. And this pointed to a table of all the methods that instances of that class can call. Then Jenny had written, any class you define is an instance of a class object called class. So if we were to write class cake in our code, we're creating a class object named cake. It's an instance of another class object, and the name of that object is class. So all classes are of type class with a capital C. Then Jenny had this code. So it says class cake. And there was an instance method called tasty, which returned true if the flavor of the cake was carrot. So I knew Jenny was a smart lady. And then there was a class method called edible, which always returned true. Then she'd written, imagine we had a cake instance called carrot. Well, this is what the method lookup chain would look like. You would have your carrot object. It would have a class label. It would point to a Ruby object called cake. That would have its own class label. It would have a methods label, pointing to a table which had the tasty method, since all instances of cake can call tasty. And the class label for cake would point to a Ruby object called class. It would have its methods label, and inside that table would be edible. Then Jenny had written, a method definition always comes from an object's class. And at this point, Mike shook his head in frustration. He said, it cannot be that the edible method lives on the parent class for all classes. Can I show you something, he asks me. Can I go into your computer? I said, okay. So he goes over to my desk, he opens up terminal, enters pry, and he loads in this cake class from Jenny's notes. And he starts to show that the class for cake is indeed class, and then he searches all the instance methods for class for the edible method. And it's not there. What a mystery. I'm stumped, I'm not sure how to proceed with this one. But D loves a challenge, and if anyone can do it, D can. Besides, this meant a lot to Mike. He was going to pay me a lot. So I agreed to take on the case. Chapter 2. Ever heard of Google? Or maybe if you care about your privacy, you use DuckDuckGo. Yeah, well, when I'm D, I don't believe in these tools. I don't use them, no. And it's no coincidence that with this approach, I've become the best private investigator the industry has to offer. So what did I have? Books. Books, books, and more books. And I spent a whole day looking through a load of books. I couldn't find anything useful. So I said, okay, let me form a hypothesis and go from there. I said, the edible method, while not in cake, must be somewhere in the ancestry tree. So what's the ancestry tree? Well, it shows all of the classes and modules that a class inherits from, so all the possible places that the method could be. And I created this method called where. It took two parameters. One was an object, and then the second one was the method you're looking for. And I said, okay, so look through the ancestors of an object's class to find the class where the instance methods of that class, and only that class, include the method that you're looking for. So first things first, I wanted to check that this method was working. So I created an instance of cake called carrot, and then I checked that where the tasty method was in relation to carrot, expecting it to give me cake. Great, it's working. Now it was the moment of truth. Let's find the edible method. It has to be somewhere in this ancestry tree. What? Nowhere? At all? What a mystery. So at this point, I'm confused, and I think, okay, it's time for some fresh air, a change of scenery. So I decide to head to my favorite co-working space. And here I feel at home, I'm surrounded by people hacking away, and I quickly settle down at one desk. But given my naturally inquisitive nature, my eyes couldn't help but stray to the screen of the guy next to me. Now, he was playing around in IRB with something called object space, and I thought, what's that? Looks interesting. And he said, well, you can interact with all of the live objects within a Ruby session. So if you were to type object space, count objects, and pass in the symbol T class, you'll see all the live class objects that you have in a Ruby session. So I thought, okay, it's probably time for a break. Why don't I have my own play in IRB? So I went into IRB, and I counted all the live class objects that there were. 936. So I said, let me create a class and see that that number goes up to 937. 938? What? Let me try that again. 940? What a mystery. But I couldn't spend too long thinking about this because just then the phone rang. And it was my friend wondering where I was. I'd completely forgotten that I had agreed to go to a tech lecture with her. I was anxious. I didn't have much time to solve Mike's case, but I'd also been canceling a lot on this friend, putting my private investigative duties first. So I thought maybe on this occasion, I'll make some time for her, and I rushed out of the door. Chapter 3. I turned up just in time for the beginning of the lecture. It was about a language called small talk. I wasn't that interested. After all, I only care about Ruby. But I listened anyway. So she said that small talk was born in 1970, and it had led to the creation of the object-oriented programming paradigm. But I couldn't concentrate for much longer. I couldn't stop thinking about my play with object space. Each time I'd created one class, and yet two new objects were being created. Psst, pay attention, my friend said. So I looked up and I saw that the lecturer was asking, well, what is the class of a class in Smalltalk? And she had this code on the screen. I hadn't quite been following, but I saw she'd printed out a polygon object, and she'd asked, what is the class of this polygon object? And it had returned polygon class. And then she'd asked the system, well, what is the class of polygon class? And it had returned a meta class. The class of a class is called a meta class, she reiterated. And then she went on to say that all of the languages that Smalltalk has inspired have their own concept of meta classes. And this included Objective-C, Java, Python, and Ruby. Something clicked. One class, but two objects. So I made my apologies to my soon-to-be no longer friend, and I rushed out of the door and I ran home. I thought I would try my luck, but of course that would be too easy. So I said, well, let me see all the methods that I could possibly call on cake. Now this list was way too long, very overwhelming, so I said, okay, why don't I focus on the methods that only have the word class in them? Okay, so this was a lot more manageable, and two methods stood out for me. One was superclass, and the other one was singleton class. First things first, I said, let me remind myself of the ancestry tree for cake, because I know that edible is not in any of these places. Now it was time to see, what did superclass return? Object. So I knew it wasn't what I was looking for, because object is in the cakes class ancestry tree. So now it was time to see, what did singleton class give me? Oh, this was something that I hadn't seen before. And when I looked at the ancestry tree for the cake singleton class, I saw 3 new objects that I had not seen before. Very interesting. And so I decided to go back to my where method, but this time, instead of looking inside an object's class's ancestors, I would instead look at the ancestors of the singleton class so that I could now search for the edible method within those 3 new objects that I just discovered. Now it was time to give it a go. Result. And I thought, wait, let me just check that what I think is happening is actually happening. And in my excitement, I forgot how to type, but I made it eventually. And I confirmed that the edible method was living on cake's singleton class. Case closed. Chapter 4. At this point, I'm delighted. I'm super excited to share the news with Mike. And I give him a call. I say, can I come round? I've solved the case. He says, of course, come round. I'm going to have the notes ready and waiting for you. But although I'd solved the case for Mike, I wasn't satisfied. I just discovered a whole new concept in the language that I hadn't heard of before. What are singleton classes? So instead of going directly to Mike, I took a detour to visit a friend of mine. Her name was Ellen. She was 43, a freelance developer, and she regularly contributed to the Ruby language code base. So I proceed to tell her all about the case, and when I'm done, I ask her, what are these singleton classes all about? Well, they're hidden classes created internally behind the scenes in Ruby. They're there to hold methods defined for only one particular object. So take your instance carrot of the cake class. Its singleton class would have methods that are specific to carrot only and not to another instance. Say you made a chocolate cake. I said, okay, so if they're working away behind the scenes, when does knowing about them become useful? So Ellen thought for a while. And then she told me about one of her recent clients. They were called Budgeting Inc. And they were a clever artificial intelligence machine learning personal finance tool for small business owners. And they were expanding globally. And they needed to roll out slightly unique versions of their software for each new city that they entered. Now, when Ellen first looked at the code base, she was horrified. Different developers had been responsible for each new city, and it looked like they were trying out a new approach for everything, naming, testing, designing interfaces. So there was lots of duplication in the code. That meant that there was also lots of wasted time on development because the developers were often reinventing the wheel and often doing a bad job. So there were lots of bugs. Some things were copied, some things were left out. It was difficult to see what was important. So the developers were unhappy because they had a lot of tiresome work. The cognitive load was high. And the product owner was also unhappy because delivery was either very slow or things were spun out quickly and were bug-ridden. So Ellen wasn't quite sure what to do. But then she said, I decided to create a DSL, a domain-specific language. And she said, do you know what I'm talking about? I said, it's a mystery to me, Ellen. You're going to have to explain. So she beckoned me over to her computer, and she said, let me show you a basic version of a DSL. So she created this class within a prize session. So it was called City Instance. It had a class method called construct, which took a block. Then we had a variable called city, which called out to initialize via the new method. We then called instance eval on city, and we passed in that block. And Ellen said, pay attention to this line. It's going to be very important later. I said, okay. And then we returned city. We had an attribute reader called taxes, and we have an initialize method, which sets up taxes instance variable as an empty array. And finally, we have a method called tax, which takes a name as an argument, and we put that tax into the taxes collection. So now it's time to give it a go. So Ellen creates New York as a city instance. And she adds a couple of taxes. And then she says, puts New York, prints out the taxes, and she said, well, there we have it. That is a very simple DSL. And we can quickly spin up these lightweight city objects. She said, imagine if we had other properties, not just taxes, but a list of banks or maybe finance schemes. And imagine if we had more information about each of these properties. So maybe the taxes, we have information about the rates or the thresholds. So using this kind of simple framework, it wouldn't be hard to extend the city instance class to create incrementally more complex city objects. Well, imagine taking that to the next level, Ellen said. Imagine interacting with this city instance class in the same way on the command line, but instead of just creating variables in our price session, we're spinning up new subclasses of city and other related models for each tax, scheme, or bank. So Ellen explains that this was the kind of thing that she had produced for Budgeting Inc., a DSL that allowed for quick and easy scaffolding of each new city subclass and any related classes. So she said, we know how to spin up identical city instances with different names and different taxes. But what about if one of the cities had a quirk, something different about it? So she said, okay, think of a place in the UK, since that's where I'm from. So I said, okay, I chose Bath, because that was the scene of my first case. So she created Bath, she added a tax, and she asked me to think of something that made people in the UK really unhappy. Can you think what it is? Well, she didn't like my suggestion. She thought it was too depressing. And so she said, well, let's just focus on the fact that it rains all the time. And when it rains, the government feels sorry for everybody, so they clear everybody's taxes. Sounds good? So we had Bath, we printed out the taxes, and then it rains. And so the government calls a rainy day amnesty. And when we print the taxes again, they're gone. Now remember our friends in New York, said Ellen. They've heard about the rainy day amnesty, and they want it for themselves. So next time it rains, they call it. But it doesn't work. They get undefined method rainy day amnesty for city instance, and then there are all these characters. And Ellen said, do you know what those are? I said, no. So she said, well, look at this. And she called singleton class on New York, and it returned the same object. So when we enter the realm of DSLs and we use methods like instance eval, we're leveraging the existence of singleton classes. Because what instance eval does is it stores any method declarations passed in via that block on an object singleton class. So Ellen said, hold on to that thought though. Let's take a step back to the high level for just a moment. By creating a DSL like this, it enabled the developers to spin up each new city instance effortlessly. So she explains how she managed to abstract out all of the key similarities between any city. So now the developers had a frictionless way via the command line of spinning up the foundation that they needed. And the code was better maintained now because all of that scaffolding had been well tested once, Ellen had dealt with it, and now none of the developers had to worry about it. They could focus on the interesting bits, the customization required for each new city. So the scope was much more refined. Now the developers were happy because interacting with the system was a joy. It was easier to have a high-level overview of the whole domain in their head, purely just by the documentation for the DSL. And the product owner was delighted also. Far fewer bugs, delivery was faster, and she could also speak in the same language as the developers by expressing new requirements with the terminology of the DSL. But let's go back to singleton classes, said Ellen. When is knowing about them useful? Well, one of the main reasons that I was able to complete the project to a high standard was because I understood exactly where I was defining methods. Because once you enter the realm of dynamically creating classes and methods on singletons, class hierarchy and method lookup gets far more interesting, as you saw. So you might be getting error messages, and you need to be able to spot where the singleton methods are involved and where they're hiding, because it can save you from headache. But beware, said Ellen. I've been going on about DSLs, but they're not the answer to everything. If you've got complex repeated business rules, and you need to customize behavior in some specific instances, then you can consider DSLs as an option. But even then, approach with caution. But you don't even need to be writing DSLs for it to be beneficial for you to understand the basics of how they work. If you're using Rails, you see DSLs every single day. So she went over to her computer, she went on the Rails guides website and said, well, active record migrations, they are carried out via DSLs. When you say create table and then you say t.string, t.text, that's communicating via a DSL. And when you specify how your Rails app handles HTTP requests, that's also a DSL with the resources keyword. And it occurred to me that I'd just been doing this stuff by rote. You know, I didn't stop to think about what was happening behind the scenes every single time I typed the resources keyword into my roots.rb file. And there's more of these, said Ellen. So when people talk about Rails magic, it's not really magic. It's more a collection of well-written DSLs. And then Ellen said, I hope you're TDDing all of the time. And I said, of course, what do you take me for? And she said, well, RSpec, with its describe, context, and it blocks, they're all DSLs. And with all of these Rails and RSpec DSLs, knowing about singleton classes can help. Because you might find yourself in a tricky problem. You can't make head or tail of it, particularly if you inherit a code base. And if you're seeing a funny bug to do with methods, you never know. Singleton classes might be the answer. And having them as part of your suite of debugging questions is useful. So I was feeling very leveled up by the end of this conversation. And armed with this new knowledge, I headed over to Mike's. But when I arrived, I found a Mike who had tears in his eyes. He'd obviously been recently crying. And he had crumpled pieces of paper in his hand. And he raised his arm towards me, offering me the papers. They looked exactly the same as the method lookup notes of Jenny's that he had brought me the day before. I took the notes from him, I looked through them. I couldn't see what was wrong. They looked the same. So there was the carrot object with its class label. It pointed to a cake object with its class label. It had its methods label with the tasty in the table. And then we had the class objects with its method label with edible. But wait, it didn't say class like last time. This time, it said cake singleton. And when Mike saw me notice this difference, he fell to his knees and broke down in tears. Jenny knew about singleton classes all along. He'd gone into her room to find the notes in advance of my arrival, and this was the copy that he had found. Jenny was so desperate to secure the job for herself, she set out to intentionally mislead Mike in the hope that he would fail a whole section of the interview and therefore look underprepared. I was disappointed in myself. I'd been so focused on the main villain, the shady mastermind, that I failed to spot a villain right under my nose. My best friend tried to sabotage me, Mike cried, and he started wailing, saying he wasn't going to go to the RIP interview tomorrow. I said, nonsense, you can't give up now. So I crouched down next to him, I gave him a comforting pat on the shoulder. I said, you can do this, and I have just the thing to help set you apart from Jenny. So he looked up at me hopeful. Have you heard of DSLs? I asked him. And I proceeded to tell him everything that Ellen had just shared with me. And although Mike still looked devastated as I left him, I had confidence that I had inspired him with the power of singleton classes, that he'd pull himself together and go and secure the RIP internship for himself. Two months later, and I managed to drag myself to a Ruby hack night. And I arrive, I'm milling about, enjoying the free food and drink, when I hear a couple of people whispering in the corner. Ooh, she's Ruby famous, one of them says. And I look across the room, and who do I see? Ellen. So I walk over, we catch up. I tell her I've been reflecting on the case of the missing method and my takeaways. So we have singleton classes, and they're there to hold methods defined for one particular object. And the understanding of them opens up a whole new world of Ruby. We can be dynamically creating classes and methods on the fly in more complex applications via DSLs. But I said to Ellen, I still feel as if day to day I can get by ignoring them. So do I really have to care about them at all? Not really, Ellen said. Like you say, yeah, if you're using DSLs, then yes, definitely know what you're doing. And they underpin popular frameworks like Rails, but day to day you can get by. However, she said, understanding why singletons are there, I think, is super interesting and empowering. Think of the Ruby core team. They wanted to keep things as straightforward and simple as possible. And by simple, I mean minimize special cases. Aim for having one way, one pattern for explaining how anything works. How consistent can we get things, they continually asked while developing the language. So what is consistent in the realm of Ruby methods? Well, if you think about it, all methods in Ruby are defined in only one of two places, a normal class object or a singleton class. And every method in Ruby is really an instance method. Method lookup always starts with a singleton class. So when we think about class methods, they don't really have any fundamentally different behavior, because what they are really are instance methods where the object in question is a class and the method is stored on the class's singleton. So yeah, singleton classes are invisible, but they're everywhere. They're a fundamental part to how Ruby and its method lookup works. So I left the hack night deep in thought. Ellen had inspired me to explore more of Ruby behind the scenes. There was so much here that I didn't know. I had only scratched the surface. And I'd always been a general Ruby PI, and I'd been very successful in the field. But perhaps it was time to find a niche and reach the next level. Thank you.
Thank you, Nadia.
Yeah, if
That
anyone
was a
wants to
great
ask me.
talk. Feel free to catch up with Nadia later. She is here for the day.